Thank you. Okay, so hi, I'm Carola Frediani. I'm a journalist from AGI covering tech, cyber, and these kind of topics. And I'm pleased to be here to moderate in this panel about WikiLeaks and about what we learn by WikiLeaks and if we still need WikiLeaks today. And I will start to introduce our panelists. This is Joseph Cox, journalist from Motherboard, covering hacks, leaks, cybersecurity, one of the best on the scene. And then we have Rama Skyer, who is an independent journalist from Tunisia and also working with the Hermes Center for Transparency and Human Rights and working on various projects of whistleblowing. And then we have Stefania Maurizi, a journalist from La Repubblica, who has been since 2009 media partner with WikiLeaks. And so she's been working on a lot of documents and materials. And so she can tell us a little bit about her work also. And just a few words to introduce why we are doing this panel. In the 2012, it was published a book. It was entitled This Machine Kills Secrets, How WikiLeaks, Cypherpunks, and Activists Aim to Free the World's Information. It was written by an excellent journalist, Andy Greenberg. And it was about how WikiLeaks brought to light a new form of whistleblowing that used cryptography and internet tools to help sources to spill government and corporate secrets, protecting their identities. It was about a new generation of activists, coders, journalists, bringing a new culture into the newsrooms. So I think WikiLeaks did really change journalism, and not just because it launched an online platform allowing sources to leak classified information in an anonymous way, but also because they did hard journalism, actually asking hard questions and challenging governments. At the same time, there have been many bonds of contentions between WikiLeaks and some media organization or individual journalists about methods, choices. It seems that in the last year, these frictions increased. And the whole DNC hack story, for instance, the Democratic National Committee hack during the presidential election in the US, and is relation to the Russiagate, or at least the accusation that behind the hack, there may be the Russian intelligence, made things a little bit worse. So my questions here are, so really, is WikiLeaks still relevant? Did they actually do something that you as a journal wouldn't do it? Or how journalism should approach similar situations? And well, I have many questions, so I think we can start with this one. And I will ask Joseph to start talking. Yeah.
Hello. So I'll try and keep this short. I'm, as mentioned, Joseph Cox from Motherboard, which is the technology and science section of Vice. I cover cybersecurity, data breaches, leaks, that sort of thing. And within that, I regularly get data dumps from various sources. That may be something that's 20 megabytes in size, 50 megabytes, 100 gig, up to around 900 gigabytes was the last large one I got. And then having to deal that and then pick out what's in the public interest, probably leave the rest private and that sort of thing. So my position is mixed. WikiLeaks has made a substantial positive contribution to journalism. In conversations with other people here, it was really the Iraq war logs. There was a turning point for data journalism, especially in London. There was a huge set here to pull stories out of significant public interest. And of course, this was back when WikiLeaks was collaborating with The Guardian and various other papers. But something else that WikiLeaks has done is that it's also acted as sort of an archiver, almost like a librarian. So I think in 2014, a hacker targeted a company called Finfisher Now, Finfisher is a company that sells malware to law enforcement intelligence agencies. It has Bangladesh as a customer, Bahrain as well. So they're not exactly the shining example of know your customer and do pleasant business. The hacker released those files online, and then WikiLeaks made it a lot easier for people to find them by mirroring them on their own servers. So you didn't have to go and try to find the original leak, you could just go grab it from WikiLeaks instead. And a year later, the same hacker targeted Hacking Team, which is an Italian company that basically sells the same sort of thing. But WikiLeaks went a step further. Instead of just mirroring it and archiving it, they made the database of emails that was like certainly the most interesting bit of the Hacking Team leak. They made that searchable for anyone online, journalists, activists, technologists, people just curious and looking at the digital innards of a highly controversial company. And that has been a huge lasting legacy from WikiLeaks to journalism today. So there's the OCCRP database, which has 200 million public records and leaks from 198 sources, as you can see. And that actually, funnily enough, includes the Hacking Team emails as well. There's ProPublica's, I can't remember what it's called, Trump Country or Trump Land or something, and you can go and search all of these think tanks and companies that apparently have links to the Trump campaign, and perhaps you found something that a journalist missed, and then you can pick it out and send it to them. And then just on a much smaller scale, I'm in no way comparing myself to the amazing journalists at OCCRP or ProPublica, but drawing on from WikiLeaks, we've also released thousands of pages of documents. The one at the back is when we did a story on the proliferation of phone hacking technology across US local law enforcement, so they can break into phones. So we just released all those documents like that. And then the most recent one is one from a local police force buying a tool to break into fully up-to-date iPhones for about 15 grand. And some journalists may say, oh no, we're not inspired by WikiLeaks and we just did that data set all ourselves. I can tell you that the reason I did it was because I was following WikiLeaks and I was directly inspired by that. Even if my opinion has changed, I'll get into that. And then you have activists as well, who, here's one from Unicorn Riot, and they publish large chat log databases from neo-Nazis. So this has really spread, not just within technologists, but activists and journalists as well. Sorry. So this is where it changes a little bit. This is the disclaimer that you get when you go to the Panama Papers database you can search online. And basically, the TLDR is that, hey, there's actually nothing intrinsically illegal or wrong about offshore accounts. Maybe people have them for legitimate reasons. Please don't go poking around and assuming everybody's an organized criminal in here. Now, WikiLeaks, in the past couple of years, instead of just releasing dumps with maybe a little bit of commentary or no context at all, they have increasingly been putting out dumps with misleading or inaccurate context. So recently, the WikiLeaks released Vault 7, which is documents and spreadsheets about CIA hacking tools. A lot of really interesting stuff in there. But WikiLeaks tweeted and said in its accompanying write-up of the breach that this confirms the CIA can bypass Signal and Telegram and Confide, these apps used by journalists. And they didn't just say this once, they said it several times. The thing is, Signal, Telegram, WhatsApp, Confide were not mentioned in those data dumps whatsoever. I think the general point that WikiLeaks was trying to make was that if you hack into a phone, you can get the communications before they're encrypted. That may be the case, but if you're talking about really specific apps, which all have different architecture, you can't make a general point like that. From my reporting, speaking to the people who have direct knowledge of how Signal is made, they say there are anti-forensic capabilities that would make it harder for a piece of malware to read Signal. Now, of course, maybe the CIA can read Signal messages, but that is not what Vault 7 said, despite WikiLeaks' assertions. Unfortunately, New York Times, various other media jumped on this and reported it as fact. Eventually, corrections were issued, and then you saw that spat of articles saying that WikiLeaks is wrong. Whereas the mainstream media, for lack of a better term, will likely go and correct their inaccuracies, that is still on WikiLeaks' website as of this afternoon when I made these slides. It still says the CIA can bypass encryption of signal and what so. So there's that first issue of misleading context that WikiLeaks is providing. Then there's the recent series of dumps that contain no context whatsoever. As mentioned, Russian military intelligence targeted the Democratic National Committee, a political group in the US, as well as the emails of John Podesta, who was a member of this group. WikiLeaks steadily released the emails. There's some public interest in there, also a lot of stuff like John Podesta's favorite risotto recipe, which I'd be curious to know what the news value of that is. Anyway, when you release a really large data set with no context whatsoever, there is a vacuum that people can fill themselves with whatever reading they want to do. So probably the best example of this is a conspiracy called Pizzagate, which is when people were going through these emails and convincing themselves that there was a child abuse ring in a Washington, D.C. pizzeria because Hillary Clinton or John Podesta or whoever were talking about pizza a lot, and then people assume pizza means child pornography. So I'm not going to even pretend to understand it, but that was the gist of the conspiracy theory that was going on. Now, if WikiLeaks had only released the bits that are in public interest, or maybe fed them to journalists and worked with journalists to then tease out those stories, this theory wouldn't have existed because there was no material to base it upon. And then just very briefly, no one is asking WikiLeaks to reveal its sources. It would be incredibly hypocritical of a journalist to say, oh no, we're not going to reveal our sources, but of course WikiLeaks has to if it does turn out to be Russian intelligence, whatever it may be. But the fact that the emails likely came from Russian intelligence is a key part of the story. And not having that context is, I mean, I would say it was a disservice to the reader. I don't know if you would call someone digesting WikiLeaks a reader, maybe you call them a user, but that doesn't really matter. But that is a key part of the story. Now, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange could have just said, we're not going to talk about our sources, that's it, and that would have been the end of it. But at the same time, according to a recent BuzzFeed article, Julian was going on TV, and while simultaneously saying, I'm not going to talk about whether our sources are Russians, he was also going, hey, but it might be this guy who was murdered in Washington, D.C. There's this sort of friction going on there. You either do, no, we're not talking about sources, rather than spreading this disingenuous, misleading context around the leak. So the reason I bring that up, it comes back to the context. And then just the last thing. WikiLeaks used to do redactions. It still does some, but it sometimes screws up as well, as do journalists. But throughout a series of WikiLeaks dumps, there has been a ton of personal information about completely almost random people where there's no public interest in their lives. So there's financial identity records, passports, social security numbers, credit card numbers, the names of teenage rape victims, and in this piece from the AP that looked at several breaches, the site published the name of a Saudi citizen arrested for being gay, an extraordinary move given that homosexuality can lead to social ostracism, and obviously that can lead to a prison sentence or death. So you can release information in the public interest, but you're going to undermine your own position if you then dump out everything. And then just briefly to give an example of what we might do when we get a large data set, this was something like, I can't remember, maybe 60 gigabytes of material from 2 companies. These companies made malware to install on a phone. Maybe it's your husband or your wife, and you want to know if they're cheating on you. Obviously, that's illegal in the US, because it will violate wiretapping laws and hacking laws. Regardless, you put the malware on there. You can then get their email, their Facebook, their text messages. You can remotely turn on their camera. You can remotely turn on that microphone. So these hackers targeted these companies because they didn't like what they were doing, and they gave the data to us. That data, as you can see, included email addresses, passwords, GPS locations of people being tracked, the actual photos that were being intercepted, company emails, credit card information, and various company documents. Now, we didn't go and put all of this on the internet, obviously, because there's a lot of really sensitive stuff there. But we still wanted to get across a sense of scale to the reader. So we took those GPS locations that show, yeah, a lot of people are using this spyware all across the world, and we obfuscated them with a little dirty Python script, so then you can still see, you can still get the point of the story without ruining people's lives. Now, that is not the approach that WikiLeaks is taking. It is just dumping this information, and hell be damned if you happen to be a Saudi that's now been outed as gay. So sort of my TRDL, which I've now lost, was that context and what you decide not to include in a piece or a data dump is just as important as what you ultimately publish. And as for whether journalists still need WikiLeaks, I think they were crucial at a time to introduce a new form of journalism, a new way of dealing with data. But as you can see from that series of irresponsible and ethical leaks, I think it's okay that journalism can go and do its own thing now. So thanks for making my case, and I'll be prepared to be beaten up. But
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. I think I would ask now Stefania to tell us, I don't know if maybe even to reply to Joseph, but also to tell us what has been your work with WikiLeaks. And he made two interesting points about redaction and context.
Yeah. So thank you for being here. And I mean, I respect all opinions and criticism, and there are certainly some points which need to be addressed. I'm bringing my experience, is the experience. I'm not sure if it is working properly. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm bringing my experience because I was there since the beginning. So among partners, I'm the only one who has worked on all the releases, apart from Saudi files, Yemeni files, DNC, and the Turkish emails. As for the rest, I have worked on all of them, which means 9 years of work. And there were situations in which I was forced to go to the court because I got libel cases. So I was forced to demonstrate to the judge that what I had written was true, that the documents were genuine, and that the documents provided to WikiLeaks, provided by WikiLeaks to the partners were verified. We went through a proper editorial process of verifying these documents and writing things which were genuine. And we went to the court and we won the case because the documents were genuine and because WikiLeaks had verified them and we had verified them as well. So what we were publishing was true. So why I'm mentioning this? Because there is a lot of disinformation mess. Of course, WikiLeaks doesn't spend a lot of time addressing these issues, and this lack of communication, I think, is part of the problem, because they don't confront this kind of criticism. So this, sometimes there is a lot of misunderstanding, misrepresentation, and so on. Joseph was mentioning dumps. I mean, WikiLeaks, most of the times, I'm bringing my experience, not because the story is about me, but because I was there as a media partner. So I can tell you that the only situation in which WikiLeaks dumped documents without partnering with any media partner was really 3-4 times. As for the rest, WikiLeaks has always work with partners. Vault 7, the CIA series on the CIA cyber weapons, was released with partners. I was a partner, Libération was a partner, and Mediapart was a partner. It was not a dump, it was a release. We work on the documents, we verify the documents. And I want to tell you how difficult it is to verify secret documents, CIA documents. You cannot go around telling, look, expert, I have these secret documents, I need to verify them. You cannot do it because you risk to be killed. Seriously, you have CIA documents. You cannot go around telling, I have CIA documents, I need to verify them. I need an expert, and you tweet, I need an expert on CIA. You cannot do this. You have to have your own network of experts you trust with secret documents. You share these documents, you verify them, with many difficulties. So we never dumped Vault 7. They never dumped Vault 7. We never participated to a dump. It was a release. And we verified these documents very seriously. Of course, in the case of Yemeni file, it's true, they dumped these documents, and I'm unhappy. I accept the criticism of Joseph. I mean, I'm unhappy about dumps, because I don't think dumps are fine. I don't think there is proper editorial process. And this is very serious. It goes beyond WikiLeaks, because if you can release documents on the public sphere and no one verifies these documents, you can be a tool for intelligence agencies, for governments, for a lot of bad guys. So I don't like dump of documents. I don't think it is properly done when you dump documents on the public sphere, because you can do influence operation, you can do manipulation of the readership, you can do all sorts of bad things. So I don't like dump. And I don't think that dump are relevant. Look at the Anonymous. They dump all sorts of things. Can you remember a single revelation apart from the Palantir plan from Anonymous? I have serious problem to remember anything of this dump. Sony, yes, Sony was also released by WikiLeaks, but in any case, if you remember, these people are in prison. For what? For what? I mean, I respect them, but I don't think that was the right way to do it. I'm not saying they are criminals or that. I'm saying, what's the impact of this material? I understand there's a kind of civil disobedience protest, or showing that you can show them that their security is so shitty, so ineffective, whatever you want. But if you look at the impact of this information, how this information actually play out in the public sphere, in the public interest, they did very badly, and they risk a lot. I'm really unhappy about these young people in prison. It's not. I don't think they should have done this in this way. They should have done these things differently. I mean, so I'm completely against dumps. I'm in favor of good journalism, proper journalism verification, which we have done many, many times, almost all the time. And we have done sometimes with serious fear. I remember when we worked on the Vault 7, I was really scared, because I learned about these documents, and I was really scared for them, for WikiLeaks. I was really scared for the WikiLeaks staff, which had these documents, top secret and sometimes top secret. In the case of the NSA interception of world leaders, I worked when we had this interception of Berlusconi, of the French presidents, of the Japan leaders, of the German leaders. That was a serious matter. We had top secret documents about world leaders being intercepted by the NSA. So you run a risk, WikiLeaks run a risk, the staff run a risk, their technical people run a risk. So you have to realize that this work is far from being shitty dumping on the internet with no review. There's a lot of work. There is a lot of work for them, and there is a lot of work for us, for we media partners. There is a lot of work for the newsroom, because we get libel case, and we had to be sure that we got it right. I mean, I remember when we released the Syria files, we had these documents about this big company, Finmeccanica, selling this technology to the Syrian government, and the story was spread on dozens of emails. When you have email, you don't have an email with the whole story. You have to find tiny bits of the story spread into dozens of emails. So we got all these emails reconstructing the story, and we verified each of these emails, also thanks to some mistakes made by the company, by Finmeccanica. I would not say which kind of mistake, because I want to use these techniques to verify the documents. So I want to keep, I want I hope that these companies keep making mistakes so that we can verify the documents. And finally, when we published this story, my telephone was ringing and ringing with Finmeccanica calling and calling and calling. And finally, they couldn't file any libel case because the story was true, and we were able to prove that the story was true. And we had verified the material properly. So I'm very unhappy about this story of dumps, because WikiLeaks dump in very few occasions. As I said, Yemeni files, the Turkish emails, DNC. I didn't work on DNC. As I said, I missed 3 releases, and DNC was one of these. So I cannot, I would have preferred to see those emails released with partners, as it happened with the Podesta files. I was a partner for the Podesta files. We verified it. I verified the documents and published the documents, and the documents were true, and no one filed any libel case and anything. But we were ready to prove that the documents were true. And so I'm really unhappy about having WikiLeaks treated in these ways about dump, because there is no dump apart of very, very few occasions. As for the Russian intelligence, I mean, I understand what Joseph is saying. Of course, I think a lot of the debate about this Guccifer 2.0, which basically was a cover for, maybe a cover for the Russian intelligence. You know, I think a lot of this debate doesn't make sense, because people keep insisting about WikiLeaks not disclosing the source. WikiLeaks not disclosing the source. We journalists, any media organization is not supposed to disclose the source. But let's imagine that the source is actually the Russian intelligence. Let's imagine that WikiLeaks actually received these documents from the Russian intelligence, and it was aware. Let's imagine that WikiLeaks was really aware that this Guccifer 2.2 actually was the Russian intelligence. Well, if the documents were true, who cares whether it was the Russian intelligence or the Vatican intelligence or whatever? If the documents are true, the documents are true. Even the devil can give you some. Many of our sources are very nice people. Many of our sources are very bad guys. We have to admit this. We have sources who are bad guys. We have sources who have all sorts of motivation for providing us documents, information, tips, and whatever. We are not saints. We are not. We have sources who are bad guys. But what is the important thing is whether the documents are true or whether the documents are not true. Because if the documents are not true, then it's a mess. Then you are doing something bad. Then you are doing influence operation. Then you are doing disinformation. That's not journalism. That's not proper information and not proper editorial work. So let's imagine that Guccifer 2.0 was the actual source of WikiLeaks. I mean, Guccifer 2.0 released some of these documents in an exclusive agreement, even to The Hill, the online political website, US political website. They released some of these documents to The Intercept. The Intercept published documents of Guccifer 2.0. Does this mean that The Intercept or The Hill are the tools of are the useful idiots of the Russian intelligence? I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, they published these documents as WikiLeaks published these documents because the documents were important and they were relevant. And they published when the documents had the maximum impact. I remember that when we planned the publication of the NSA intercept of Berlusconi, the original plan was to publish when Mattarella, our president, was in Washington meeting President Obama. The plan was to have maximum impact, you know? And that was not because we wanted to destroy the Italian-US relation, foreign relation. We wanted to publish to have a big impact, I mean, you know? And this is what happened with the Clinton email. They published when the story had the maximum impact. And I'm sure if they hadn't published, if they had waited, probably the debate now would be, oh, they sell themselves to the Clinton, to the Democrats, because they were hoping to have the grand jury investigation closed, so they sell themselves, hoping that if they hadn't published these documents, probably the Democrats would close the investigation. I'm sure. I mean, whatever they do, if they publish, because they publish, if they don't publish, if they redact, I have seen all sorts of things with redaction. If they redact the documents, then maybe we don't know why they keep this information. Maybe they want to send messages, maybe they want to blackmail, maybe why they want to keep this information secret. If they don't redact, oh, these are irresponsible people. They want to put sources at risk, they want to put Afghan translator at risk. Do you remember the propaganda around the Afghan war logs? I remember it very well. So as soon as they published the Afghan war log, the whole matter was WikiLeaks are criminals. They have blood in their hands because they didn't redact the documents. Do you remember this? And at the end of the day, what happened? Nothing. Basically, thanks to the Manning trial, we discovered that no one died, no one was hurt, no one had any serious consequences for publishing this document. So the real matter about WikiLeaks, and now I'm closing to allow other people, other panelists to discuss the topic, is there is a lot of propaganda around WikiLeaks, and even if they are not always right, and they make mistakes. I'm not saying they are perfect. They are not perfect. When they dump documents, they don't do proper journalism. I don't like that, personally. I don't think it is journalism. So they are not perfect, but we desperately need them, because if we don't have them, we don't see any documents about the CIA published. Can you tell me any news organization in Europe, in the Western world, which has his editor arbitrarily detained? Julian Assange is arbitrarily detained for his work, for the WikiLeaks publication.
Yeah, maybe, thank you, Stefania. Maybe also we can go back on this about Julian Assange and also on some of the subjects, because I think they are complex and need to be addressed again. But before, I would like to step back a little bit and actually step aside and asking Rama, because WikiLeaks changed the whistleblowing, and afterwards many projects built upon that experience and doing their platforms for whistleblowers. And so maybe you can talk also about this. Yeah, thank you, Rama.
Thank you, Carla. So first, I represent myself. I'm Rahma Sghair. I'm an independent citizen journalist from Tunisia, and I'm currently working for the Hermes Center for Transparency and Digital Human Rights. With Carla, I wanted to make really quickly, I said something that I called a duty of remembrance or of memory. Because as a Tunisian, WikiLeaks for me has a very special meaning. The revolution in 2011 was called the WikiLeaks Revolution, after diplomatic cables from the US Embassy in Tunis revealed hard proof of the corruption of the old regime. And those, as Stefania explained, those cables were transferred to media partners in many countries. Among them was Sami Belgharbia, and many forums in the era of forums and of cyber dissidents' role in contributing to political transformation. And this is for me a point. This is for me a point of start to, let's say, to look at the history of a long process. As put in the hat of the Hermes Center, the Hermes Center actually we started, as Carla just asked me about, inspired from WikiLeaks and from the limits that both Joseph and Stefania mentioned. I tried here to, let's say, compare data leaking and traditional whistleblowing. Data leaking means tons of information, maybe disorganized intermediary process, invaluable and misused information, and serious risk and threats. And here I can add some examples from the Erdogan email dumps. There were data of electors. There are possible personal information of opposition activists from Belarus, which were communicated to the president, and after it, there has been a serious crackdown. While traditional whistleblowing works on getting few information while going through a holistic and direct process with proper verification, or what we call also in media proper journalism, where the data is actionable and the tools that are used were unsafe, because in traditional whistleblowing it was like word to mouth, normal phone, and these tools were not safe. So what digital whistleblowing tries to bring here is let's say the lesson learned from these two experiences. So it is digitally powered, secure whistleblowing or anonymous whistleblowing. It is digitally powered. It works on getting a reasonably good amount of information, but information that is qualified and actionable. It uses state-of-the-art whistleblowing protection, and we don't really know the technology used by WikiLeaks, but the ones declared like Tor are the technologies used by software, open source software for secure whistleblowing, like GlobaLeaks and SecureDrop. The software is publicly auditable, and also the process itself, as a media for the investigation, there is a lot more accountability. So if you solicit information, you can promise your whistleblower that you are going to investigate and process that information in a certain number of days and get back to them. And the whistleblower has a lot more control on the process, because they know where is it going, who's going to process it and investigate it, and where it's going to be published. And for sure, less risks for the source, because we are talking about a process where there is a proper verification and data retention. This is something, for instance, is interrogation point with WikiLeaks. Here I arrived to what, as zooming on the Hermes Center and GlobaLeaks. The Hermes Center is an Italian association which develops GlobaLeaks. GlobaLeaks is an open source software which enables to create secure whistleblowing platforms in an easy way. It presents itself as a simple submission form with embedded security. Something that is special about GlobaLeaks is that it's really usable. So it has been built and evolved since 2011 based on the feedback of journalists, and journalists find it very easy tool to work with. Here I would like just to come back to a sentence by Julian Assange when he defines WikiLeaks. He says, WikiLeaks is a protection intermediary, and we receive the tips, the content, the leaks, and then we give them to the media, and this is what we are doing. GlobaLeaks says maybe now we have the technology not to need to have an intermediary, and media can directly actually get this information and control the process of solicitation, the verticals, or let's say the topics. So if you focus on countering mafia or corruption, you can do that and solicit tips for that context. A human rights violation in a country, it's the same, and that really affects the quality of the investigation and the care, which we all agree that in many cases WikiLeaks couldn't have enough care, curating the content that they receive. This is something I just mentioned for GlobaLeaks. It's something community-based. The code is public. Anybody can verify it. We have been, security-wise, we've been subjects of many audits. And these are all factors, not like just to mention this techie stuff, but these are factors to build more trust with the whistleblower, so they know that they can protect their identity and the content of their submission using the software. With GlobaLeaks, the journey went worldwide. We focused a lot on localization, so it's available in more than 25 languages. I want to go, I don't know if I have so much time left, but I want to zoom again on some examples of interaction between media and NGOs, or models on how whistleblowing platforms favored collaboration between media. This is the example of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is an organization that works on wildlife protection, and they used GlobaLeaks to build a whistleblowing platform where they try, the whistleblower sends the tips, WikiLeaks does the investigation, and then they decide on how to act on that tip, which is related for sure to wildlife crime, and to transfer it either to authorities, to NGOs, local communities, media, and they are transparent on how and when they choose to go through this process. But what is really important is that this platform allows the whistleblower and the media to always stay in communication. So it's not like I'm going to dump this bottle in the sea and I don't know if it's going to be taken, when, for which motives, and this is going to be lost, or maybe I will get in touch in an insecure way. But the platform itself has in a secure way, the whistleblower can go back with the code and continue communicating with the media. The media can send messages, can try to work with the whistleblower, and his consent is their consent is really important. The consent of the whistleblower, all while respecting data retention policy that is also shared transparently with the whistleblower. The second example is the multi-stakeholder digital whistleblowing. It's a format that has been really successful. It starts with, let's say, a consortium of a number of media which are connected through the same goal, or they want to hold investigations on some shared topics, and all of them, they decide to have this one point, access point for the whistleblower. The whistleblower can either choose one media that they trust most, or they can just blow the whistle to this platform, and all the media collaborate together on and do the fact-checking, and then they publish it, all while respecting they have their own collaboration policy, as you can see. What is also another aspect that is really important, I always find myself in Hermes surrounded by a lot of hackers and techies who think technology sometimes can change things, but I think that coming from my law and political science background and civil society background, communicating that tool is a lot important, it is something related to the usability. So a lot of work should be done also on the solicitation and informing whistleblower of how secure is the tool and what is the platform about. And this is an example of what WikiLeaks, they went, to the newspapers, and they tried, to find the information that they are ready and can work on. And this, like the same example of multi-stakeholder platforms in WikiLeaks, in Mexico, with a number of investigative journalism projects, Sourcure, where a number of French journals reunited. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rama. I would like to go back to some points. First of all, I think it's fair. I mean, it would be unfair not to remind that about WikiLeaks, that, as you reminded, that Assange has been stuck for almost 6 years in the Ecuadorian embassy. And I also wonder if, I don't want really to talk about Assange here at this table, but I wonder to what extent this also impacted on WikiLeaks, also on his ability to work, and also. But I would like to go back to some of the points also brought up by Joseph, because I think at this table I think we all agree that if documents are verified and are of public interest, it is okay to write about them.
Right, which is what was missed in the points made earlier when Stefania said, oh, we verify these documents so they're true, so we worked on them. And that's fine when you're working with media, but there is this other thing that WikiLeaks, in its dumps, which I know you didn't work on, in its dumps, is not just publishing, it's going, oh, it's true, so we'll just release it. It misses that key bit, which is, does this information actually matter? Is it in the public interest? Is it going to adversely impact other people? And I think that was the bit that was just missing from the other points. Okay,
but actually I have also another question, which is, okay, given that the document is verified and of public interest, there is also another problem. How to deal with leaks that may be instrumental, to some political goals, or that, to what extent does the origin of the leak count? Or should never count?
If the information does indeed come from Russian military intelligence and it is in the public interest, that does not mean you don't write a story. It's still in the public interest, you can still write it, but I still think that's a bit of really important context for a reader. It was brought up that the Hill took documents from Guccifer too. Yeah, the Hill also did a follow-up piece where they explained Guccifer's media strategy and how the Russians were likely manipulating. So they did both. They included the context later on, and they also reported on the documents. If I was going to do a piece about data breach at Netflix, and the hackers, this is a real example, the hackers were blackmailing Netflix, I'm going to include that detail, because it's crucial to the overarching story.
Okay, again, giving context to the reader also about, and Stefania, maybe also, I don't know if you also want to talk about, I don't know, Assange or...
It depends on what
or you want to...
I want to ask, because I found Rama speech interesting. I think there is an important aspect here to understand. It is one matter, the technology is one matter, but WikiLeaks is not only about the technology. It's, when we ask ourselves, do we need WikiLeaks? Well, WikiLeaks is not just a platform. WikiLeaks did not send to Hong Kong a platform to save Edward Snowden. WikiLeaks sent a journalist, Sarah Harrison, and she had and has a lot of trouble because of this. So WikiLeaks is not just about the technologies, about the submission system. WikiLeaks is about risking risking your head for saving a source, for protecting a source, for publishing what others don't want to publish. Look at the Snowden files. So we have the New York Times, we have ProPublica, we have the Washington Post, who have this huge archive with bombshells, and they don't publish. It's not a matter of technology. This morning we had James Risen telling how his newspaper and his editor regularly kill important story. So WikiLeaks is not just about technology. It's not that we don't need the intermediary because now we had other solution. Of course, that's good. It's important to have a system for any newsroom who want to improve source protections using technologies. That's good. I like it. I want to improve this and I want to adopt this. It's fine. But it is the problem. The whole matter about WikiLeaks is not just about the technologies. That's just one part of the thing. It's not really relevant because technology spread. What was initially just for a platform owned by WikiLeaks now is GlobaLeaks, is SecureDrop, is all sorts of platforms around the world. But the problem is how many sent their journalists to Hong Kong to save Snowden? 0. It took WikiLeaks. How many publish the Snowden files? The Intercept, but we haven't seen a lot of documents so far. If WikiLeaks had those documents, they would have published everything. I'm sure, I know that they are obsessed with publishing in the public interest. I'm sure that database would come out. You know, so it's not just a matter of having the technologies. The technology is nothing if you have Bill Keller who killed your story. The technology is nothing if you have your editor saying, look, leave Snowden in Hong Kong because the legal risk for our newsroom is too big. Look, if the MI6 come to our newsroom at The Guardian, we destroy the documents because we don't want a conflict with the state which destroy our newspapers. Our newspaper, we can't afford to destroy The Guardian. And if we go into this clash, into this conflict with the MI5 or the MI6 with the state, we are dead. And WikiLeaks say, okay, fine. The Pentagon asked me to give them back the document. I will not give you back the document. I go in an embassy and I make a fuss. And I will shame you and I will show the world that you will be unable to get me. And you will not get me, and I will spend 6 years in the embassy, and you will not get the documents, and I will publish, and I don't care what you are saying. I don't care, and I publish. This is why we need the WikiLeaks.
Yeah, I guess your point is it's not just technology, it's the adversarial journalism we are talking about. Yeah. Also, maybe Rama, you want to say something, but I think also it's important for in many countries to have a local platform working with local media organization. I guess this is also very important.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I just had a comment earlier about what Stefania says about sources and how sometimes we know that the source is the bad guy. This is something that it doesn't really fit into the whistleblowing idea, because a whistleblower is always the good guy, is a person who has as intention public interest. And I also agree with Joseph when the documents are related to public interest to have those documents investigated and published. But sometimes in WikiLeaks, we don't really know the decision-making process. We don't know when these documents were received and how manipulative is the source, if the source is a bad guy. So you said that sometimes you don't know when to publish it because we will receive accusations. But I think the answer is always clear. If there is a risk for people's lives, no publishing. If there is a risk to cause harm, there is no publishing. And this is why I was frankly, I was a bit disturbed when we call those mistakes. I think there are grave mistakes, and they should not. I don't know how the whistleblower can still build trust on those mistakes anymore. And this is why I think distributed systems are not only about the technology, but also about giving back the control to the whistleblower. And maybe before, as you said, it's true, there was no other entity except WikiLeaks to which we can send this serious information. And as you said, we don't want that pressure in your newsroom. Today you can have it in your newsroom, and you won't have more risks than Assange in the embassy.
Because we have just like 5 minutes, I think. Are there questions from the, yeah. Renata.
Very quick question, because I was, I mean, for me, I was completely unfamiliar with the story of what happens behind the New York Times and how hard it is to actually publish in the US this kind of things. And I come from Guatemala, you know, and my country usually is not priority in the newsrooms. So many times, very important information about countries like Guatemala, Honduras, I don't know, remote countries that are not very relevant economically, and countries lacking oil, basically, is completely out of the picture of mainstream journalism. I'm sorry about doing this big introduction to get to the point, but my point is, there's a need for. I'm no longer concerned, and I think that WikiLeaks revolutionized the way how to securely submit documents electronically. And this is the great work that you have been doing and that many have been doing. But we have a problem, and the problem that we have right now is, well, two problems. One is publication, because you can submit the more shocking the information that you submit, the less the chances of the information getting published. And in the New York Times, I mean, they have to check with the government and so on, and so the government prepares the PR plan to address the issue in advance and so on. In countries like mine, they get killed, like basically, if you dare to publish certain information. So, and my question will be to all panelists, how do we make sure, like we have all the infrastructure, but I was shocked to see here how precarious media is, how little resources they have, and how the average small newspaper cannot even afford litigation, to answer the question on why we need WikiLeaks. And the second question will be, like, there's also on the source documents and these large data sets, the thing is that mainstream media and the big newspapers controlling all the news cycle will look for the juicy, interesting bits about US, Europe, main economies, key issues for them. But then for the rest of the world, and I can share the experience of a Guatemalan journalist using the data sets of WikiLeaks. It really is a big thing to have access to source documents because the context of certain situations, the local context matters a lot. And so how can we make sure that newsrooms, international newsrooms receiving really relevant public information, consider really relevant public information just their key audience, which is usually their countries, and the key priorities, economic priorities. And how can we make journalists less afraid of sharing full source documents? Because it should be like the general practice, in my opinion, because if a situation will look very different, facts will be very different in the context of Pakistan, in the context of Honduras, in the context of Cuba. Local context matters, and usually international newsrooms lack that. So WikiLeaks did that and does that still well. No other media is doing that, of publishing full docs. I think that the journalists are publishing less and less information about what they publish in the area of so-called fake news. So it's kind of contradictory. So first, how can we make sure that it is not just EU, US-centric, precarious, top-level agenda reporting when they do not show the full doc? And the second is, how can we make sure that they are actually publishing, and how can we make a rule that the killed stories are disclosed after a period of time by journalists?
Yeah. Maybe I will ask if there are other questions, maybe we can collect all the questions so that and try to fit into time. 5 minutes, yeah, we have 5 minutes, so please brief questions and also brief answers from you.
Yeah, we'll keep it brief.
Just in relation to WikiLeaks publishing, for example, John Podesta's emails that were hacked by the Russians, what was the public interest in publishing his risotto recipe?
Okay.
Sorry, what did you say?
What is the interest of publishing Podesta recipe?
Okay.
Or anyway. Other questions? No? Okay. So, so we have a very difficult question about like how journalism, the health of journalism, and how we can make it stronger and be sure that, you know.
Wait, wasn't it that so the complaint was that European and American media will pick up and take their pieces? Well, maybe WikiLeaks should reach out to more Latin American countries then, right? And maybe if they're doing these media partnerships, maybe they should be doing more of them.
Yes, they actually do this, and that.
I know, but like.
Yeah, of course it
but
is.
There can't be the complaint.
Yeah.
When The Guardian was forced to delete the hard drive of the Snowden documents, it shared it with the New York Times. You just said they don't share. I mean, that's the most substantial leak, and 2 leading organizations just shared it. Well, they're the only ones that had access to the Snowden documents. Anyway, I think I made my point.
No, I don't know if other people want to reply. I want to reply to that question about involving media from the south of the world. I think one of the positive things about WikiLeaks is that they are very democratic. They treat all partners in the same way. All partners have access to the full database. There are no important and B-series partners. You work with the big one, you work with the small one, all have the same dignity. All, if they want to share stories, they can share. If they don't want to share, they don't share. I like this because other kind of international collaboration do not work in this way. They are the big cats, the New York Times, and they are the small partners. And so I don't like that kind of approach. Of course, it is not easy to share documents unless you have trust, unless you know the local partners, unless you know that you can trust that local partners, unless you know that you are able to set up a kind of publication which makes sense. Because if you have to publish a document in New Zealand and in Guatemala, it's tricky. Sometimes it's very tricky to just to arrange the publication on 14 time zones and collaborating with people who is New Zealand or is in South America. So there are some logistical problems. But of course, I agree that we need to decentralize the information process because that would make the information better.
I would just say, have you heard of the Panama Papers, the world's largest journalistic collaboration? Across tons of different outlets, which has had probably the most impact of any journalistic investigation.
Which
absolutely. Seems to run counter to this.
I mean, it was excellent work. I agree. I mean, it was important.
So maybe we can stop on disagreement on the Panama Papers, and we thank you.
We have to reply to the Podesta. The Podesta, I partnered on the Podesta. This is very interesting because, you know, the Podesta files was an important release because we were able to understand the inner working of this Democrat group. We learned, for example...
You didn't get that from the recipe. I think that's the point he was trying to make.
They should have redacted, probably.
Or just not include.
I mean, I know, yes, but sometimes, look, when you have tens of thousands of documents. Sometimes you don't have the time to look for the recipe of risotto. Or
so was it, did they not have time to go through and redact the documents, or was it laziness?
Sometimes you have to prioritize other aspects. You have to prioritize, for example,
tell that to the Saudis who've been outed as gay because it wasn't redactions done.
As I said, I didn't partner for the Yemeni file, so I cannot say, I can just discuss what I work on, because I don't know what happened when I'm not there, of course. But let's take, for example, the hacking team files. They just published on the internet. And for example, my email address and phone number got dumped in these documents. I was unhappy. Of course, I was forced to change my number.
I know, me too.
Okay, but sometimes you have to prioritize. Sometimes it's more important to go out, even if you burn my mobile, is more, the good of this material in the public sphere is more important than burning number.
Sorry, yeah. Rama, you have but really one sentence, because we need to leave there.
Definitely, really quick. I just wanted to say that there are really here two different formats: centralized, that's trying to decentralize, and a model that is already initially distributed. And to answer Renata really quickly, it's true that in many countries journalists face real risk, and maybe they cannot talk about the documents that WikiLeaks have shared in the past, but there are a lot of local groups, media in exile right now, using the platform and working with their own means, having a direct relationship with the whistleblower, not having to go through the hierarchy of WikiLeaks.
Okay, thank you again, and
thanks.